Hello, CTO Demonettes. Welcome to the channel. As you know, the hot topic on the channel at the moment is HDR, hydrodynamic recanalization. Today in this episode, I want to address the question, HDR, is it safer, faster, better? Of course, I hinted at this in the last video that the real question is not whether HDR is safe or not. The real question is it safer than a wire-based strategy? Is it faster than a wire-based strategy? Is it better than a wire-based strategy? Now, those of you who follow the channel knows my guide to CTO intervention is this triangle of safety, success, and speed. So my question is the triangle better? Is it safer, faster, more successful than wire? Now, first, when we compare to wire, the most important thing we got to realize is that wire is not a single level of safety. There's a wide range of safety of wiring-based strategy, depending on what? Depending on the operator skill set. Operator wire skill makes a great difference in terms of speed, safety, and success. So if you put a wire into a master CTO interventionist's hands, he can have a very high speed, very high success rate with a very high safety. The triangle is pushed all the way up because he spent years and years practicing this art of antegrade wiring. And it can get very high. And almost very rarely perforate the vessel outside the vessel architecture. Of course, if you have a very low skill operator, let's take an extreme example, okay? If you took the patient who has a CTO who is in bed 26, okay? And you took the patient next to him in bed 27, whoever he may be, with no medical training at all, and you put him to work on the patient who has a CTO in bed 26, assuming your laws allow this to be done in your country, that patient, if he undergoes wire-based strategy, is going to be at very high risk of perforation because the operator has no wire-based skill whatsoever. He's going to perforate a lot. Probably in that case, HDR would be better than wire-based strategy for that patient. Because at least after HDR, you can see the staining, you know where you're going with the wire, and if the proctor is good and aggressive behind him, this patient stands a chance in putting the wire into the right place. Without a roadmap of stain contrast, it would be pretty hopeless, I think. So undoubtedly, if your skill level is very low, HDR is going to be safer than wire-based. Unless, of course, the patient in bed 27 happens to be Gerald Verner, in which case, probably HDR is not going to be beneficial. It's going to be more dangerous than wiring. So it depends on your skill level. If you have a high skill level, probably I would suggest wiring strategy is safer than HDR in most anatomies. But if you have a very low wiring skill level, then probably HDR is safer because it gives you more information about where things are and it requires less skill. Now, this is another problem with HDR. It actually decreases the amount of wire skill that's needed to wire through a lesion because you have stain and you're just following the stain with the wire, which is a lot less skillful than following nothing with a wire. Which means operator, if you think about it, if you're an operator that puts all your cases down to HDR, your wire skill is not going to improve very much because you're always just following the contrast. And that doesn't teach you anything about wire feel, doesn't teach you about wire response. And so you could be plateauing your wire skill, in which case your wiring skill might never catch up to be better than contrast. And in which case the rest of your life you do HDR. But if you were to practice wire-based wiring and to learn and to come to the channel, promotion here, and to read other people and meet other interventionists to learn, your wire skill will one day come near to Gerald Verner, maybe a little bit less, but it will be a lot better than contrast. So the question of whether wire-based strategy is safer or HDR is safer is very much dependent on the operator wire skills. But if we do HDR in every case, we have no skill improvement. Next question, is it faster? Well, it cannot be faster because You already have a microcatheter there. The next thing you can put down is a wire. Instead, you're putting down contrast, so that slows things down. Okay, it's one extra step. So HDR is never going to be faster than just wiring. Is it better? Are you going to get more success? Well, this is the crucial question. And I believe, yes, sometimes it's going to be better. But the question is, in what case is it going to be better? A lot of the HDR cases I've seen presented recently in meetings are cases which, to be honest with you, if he hadn't done the HDR, he would be faster and the success rate would be exactly the same. Most of these are crossable with an XTY regardless of what you've done beforehand. But I believe that there are some anatomies where HDR might be more successful. So, which are the ones that are more successful? This is what we need to work out. We need to find out the exceptional anatomies where HDR is useful. Now, for me, I think there's one classic example, and this was another Japanese master's case, which was presented in a meeting, and my response was, this will be a great HDR case. So the case was an RCA CTO, it's a mid RCA CTO. The proximal RCA is pretty healthy and normal, and suddenly goes into a taper stump and a very tight 360 degrees bend, but the bend is only around, it's sort of a 3-4 millimeter bend loop. And after that loop, the vessel grows back to a very big vessel, and it's a nice distal true lumen. So a very short CTO, maybe 15 to 18 millimeters, but located inside a loop, tapered entrance cap, and soft looking plaque. Now, of course, the operator unfortunately went antegrade and retrograde and ended up knuckling retrograde and had a very difficult time to connect. But here in this case, I would think HDR would be very good. The reason is contrast does not have stiffness. Contrast penetrates, but it doesn't have the stiff body of the wire behind it. So the problem with the loop CTO is that your wire, any stiffness of the wire is going to drive the wire towards the outer curve. But contrast is different. Contrast doesn't have any stiffness behind it. So the contrast will be able to find this through plaque, through intimal segment, and go into the strumen. And once you can see this, to follow it with a soft wire would be easy. So there are cases that HDR, I think, would work very well. But at the moment, there isn't really any thinking into which cases are good. And it's applied willy-nilly across a lot of cases, which obviously isn't. Now, those of us who are old guys like me, we used to use Carlino, so we know what Carlino is good for. The modified Carlino, not the original Carlino. It's good, especially if you've got some ambiguity. Especially loops is very good for loops. I mean, there are cases where we knuckle both sides and they just don't connect, and the reason is there's a loop. And doing a retrograde Carlino is a fantastic way to sort out this problem. Once you can see it, you can wire through it. And Carlino is also fairly good at breaking up hard plaque to allow you to go forward. The Power Carlino paper by Carlino demonstrates this technique, and sometimes that is good. It's unpredictable, and it's just a last resort most of the time because we want to try knuckle wire. We want to try something that is less unpredictable first. But there is a space for it, especially in removing ambiguity and softening plaque. There is a space for it. But we need to decide what is the space now that we have a new version of it, HDR. And I don't believe it is for every single case. Potentially, of course, it overlaps with another area of my interest, which is 3D wiring, because in some cases, there is a sort of gray zone between the clear intimal path CTO and the long, blunt, unclear CTO. There's a gray zone. There's sometimes maybe you have an island that you can see clearly, but proximal, there's a bit of ambiguity, and distal is quite clear. In these cases, maybe you start off with a proximal cap HDR, you can remove that proximal ambiguity with it, and then you can progress with 3D wiring instead of a sort of more intermediate type Neo3, UB3 type of wire going through the whole body of the CTO. And you might have a better result. So this might be potentially quite a good tool to use with 3D wiring in those selective cases. But all in all, the percentage of cases that I can see HDR being of benefit in is still very small. The next question we need to think, so there are a lot of thinking we need to do on HDR. But the next question we need to think is there any way to make it even safer? I mentioned the volume in the last video. Is there some way we can further reduce this volume? Is there some way that we can make it even safer, even more controllable? And is there some way we can define what the groups of patients that HDR particularly is used for? And I think that's probably what we should work on, rather than applying HDR willy-nilly. Anyway, there'll be one more HDR video coming up, and I hope that these 3 videos, they are not the answer to HDR, but it's a way to begin the conversation about HDR and to put it in the right part in our armamentarium in the battle against CTO. Good luck with your battles, my fellow CTO demonettes. I'll see you next time on the channel.